Well, hello and welcome to the Psychedelic Diaries. I am your host, Ray Christian, and do we have a show for you today? Marik Hazan from Tabula Rasa Ventures will be on the show. We'll do a deep dive and a soul search with him. We'll end the show as usual. We'll pick two companies for some critique and some praise with a slap and a clap. And as usual, we'll start things off with a nugget and a noodle. California psychedelic legalization efforts continue, but the government pushed the bill to 2022. Now, one of the hangups is a disagreement over whether it should be full-on decriminalization or up to certain amounts. For instance, 4 ounces of psilocybin mushrooms. Long story short, it's on ice. Stay tuned. And as for the noodle, something I've been noodling on of late is one thing. Apropos to that nugget, legalize psilocybin. And in watching Ken Burns' excellent documentary on prohibition, I was reminded of the power of single issue politics. If you want change, take one point, stay in the lane, and drive it home. And all due respect to the many other wonderful psychedelic substances, psilocybin is the Mona Lisa. So if you had to pick one, we go with the most well understood, consistently impactful, and easiest to grow. Single issue politics. Legalize psilocybin. Well, that's it for the nugget and the noodle. Producer Kevin, do we have Marik all synced up? Ladies and gentlemen, if I may direct your attention, he is the CEO and founder of Tabula Rasa Ventures. Hello and welcome, Marik Hazan.
Hey, Ray, how are you?
I'm good. Well, thank you for joining the show. Let's dive right in. So I really like some of the values on your website for Tabula Rasa. It really jumped out at me. Joy, humbleness, win-win. And for you, you're kind of one of the OGs in this space as one of the first in psychedelics to launch a company. So I'm curious for you, what was the thought process as you launched in this space, I think in 2018?
Yeah. So I had just come off of several years of doing a lot of other kind of counterculture, contrarian types of things. I actually built tech for the sex worker rights movement for a couple of years between SF and LA. Spent a few years in the decentralized governance space, contributing to some of the efforts there. It's kind of a subsector of blockchain and doing some really interesting work with kind of structured anarchy and technology for self-governing societies. And so in 2018, I had been doing a lot of this different types of work. I actually returned, I took a few years off. I did an MBA at the Yale School of Management and returned to Yale to finish in 2018. And the way that the year started was kind of in an interesting way. There was just a much greater openness in my life, as well as the life of some of the people I was hanging out with, to psychedelics. And so during the summer, even the first few days before school started, we went and took some LSD, like near somewhere in New Haven, walked around, had like, a grand old time, and just like a really incredible experience. And a few weeks later, we ended up, I, with another friend, just started vibing around psychedelics as well, and really started talking to them too. These were two different friends. And the second individual ended up being someone I worked with for a little bit of time. And we started actually running psychedelic treks at Yale and taking business students to experience psychedelics. And by the time that I graduated, we had taken 10% of Yale MBAs on psychedelic treks together, which was a pretty incredible, fun time. Definitely challenging in many, many ways. We learned so much in that process, and are just super grateful for all the people who came along and trusted us and worked with us through learning how to host psychedelic retreats, especially for kind of type A MBA, MBA students. But yeah, overall, just incredible. A lot of people found just so much fulfillment in that. And I think it was just such a important part of kind of, allowing for students to really experience each other in a very different way than they typically would get to in a business school type of environment. And early that year in summer, it was still kind of summer, very early fall of 2018, I turned to my friend who was co-running these treks with me. And I was basically like, listen, like, there's all of this stuff that's happened in cannabis over the last few years. There's about to be this crazy inflow of capital into this space. Clearly, this is something, enormous. after coming off of the sex worker rights movement, especially that movement, I just saw so many parallels, like stigmatized community, a lot of capital about to flow in, ecosystem built completely on nonprofits, now transitioning to for-profit. So there were just so many similarities. And for me, so Yale's business school program is specifically focused on nonprofit management, social impact investing. And so for me, the question is always like, okay, capitalism is going to take over, investment's going to come. How do you allow for that transition to be as smooth as possible and not take the maximum amount of casualties, which it usually does? So for me, the question was, what can we do to lay the foundations for psychedelics today to allow for there to be this smooth migration into a for-profit sector that still prioritizes and values the nonprofits, the patient populations, indigenous communities, and everyone else who has really contributed and built this space from day one. And so now today, my role has really been kind of being in the center of kind of the activists and the advocates, as well as the investors and the entrepreneurs within the space. And is a lot of what we've built with Tabula Rasa and everything else we have in-house.
Yeah. Wow. 10% of the Yale MBAs. That is remarkable, Marik. So thank you for being that guy, by the way. Tip of the spear, even the sex worker work. Those are some hot takes that people usually don't touch, that third rail type topic. And you did it and you went all in on that and on this psychedelic. So thank you for that, for being one of those guys. And I appreciate your mentions of Yale. I was really lucky at UCLA. It was incredibly formative for me and for them to give us space. And I was able to build out teams of interns. As a tech entrepreneur, these schools, these MBA nests, if you will, have been formative. And it sounds like with you at SOM, it was as well. And I'm curious, since you are an investor and also you have an incubator arm, what lessons did you take from Yale SOM that you apply specifically to your incubator?
Yeah, honestly, so I would say I learned very little from the curriculum at Yale. I spent most of my time there just kind of building startups in their basement. They have like a basement in the School of Management. It's called the Bunker, and it's where all the entrepreneurs kind of go and do their work. I was in there just all the time. Like there wasn't really assigned seating, but everyone kind of knew my desk because I literally like lived there working on stuff all the time. But honestly, like I think if there's any lesson that I can say that I like learned from the School of Management and just like being there, there's this one individual, Patricia Rezio, Trish, she was someone who kind of coordinated a lot of the things in the Bunker for the entrepreneurial ecosystem there. And honestly, like, there were a lot of really helpful people, Jennifer McFadden and Kyle Jensen, and individuals who really helped create that ecosystem. But Trish was someone who was there, and like, even though she didn't, run the entire ship, and she wasn't like the chief professor or anything like that, she was just the kindest human being in the world. And like going down to the Bunker like every single day and getting to interact with her and Amy, another individual who was working there, was honestly like the most, it was just the most welcoming community. And I think, for me, that's always been a priority, is like building community. How do you build community? And, creating the most welcoming types of spaces possible. And that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect ever. You're definitely going to make mistakes. In our incubator, we've definitely made mistakes. But I think that what we've tried to do is just create the most welcoming environment possible. One that's not, constantly judging entrepreneurs or startups based on just their metrics or their performance, but like really holding space and like showing up to meetings with them, even when, they're going through personal things and just want to talk about their personal lives and breakups and moves and like things like that. And just being there for them through the personal stuff, because like, that's the majority of the entrepreneurial journey, is like, you can be as academically knowledgeable, as good at execution as you can be working for a traditional company. But as an entrepreneur, when you're leading a company, the biggest block and the biggest barrier oftentimes is yourself. It's your own inability to like stay focused. It's your own anxiety that happens on a day-to-day basis. It's your own like, doubts in your own work. It's all the interpersonal dynamics within your company. And so like, so much of being a successful entrepreneur, whether that's building a high growth startup or a small business, I think is about like having the emotional support necessary to know that like those ups and downs of the roller coaster are very much a part of it. And if this is your dream and this is what you want to build, then like you should have the full support to be able to do that. And like, that's the commitment that we're trying to make to the entrepreneurs that we work with, is like, we'll be there with you through the ups and downs. We'll give you as much time as we can. We won't judge you on the metrics, but we will really try to, help you succeed in this, whether it is a nonprofit, a for-profit, a small business that you're trying to build, whatever it is that's organizational, that is trying to have impact at a larger scale within this space. Like, we will do our best to be there for you and try to help you make that happen. So that's really been the goal and what we've tried to provide to folks, and have done everything we can to make that happen in the best way possible.
Huh. I appreciate that. It's like good ideas and good companies both need to be nurtured, especially in the beginning, with a little bit of maybe kid gloves, and just to not judge and give them space. And it sounds like they did that to you, and you're doing that at your incubator. Perhaps a little bit of a sign of synchronicity. At the Anderson Venture Accelerator, the person that nurtured us was also named Trish Holloman-Dars, and she was wonderful to us and has been just incredible in terms of helping us reach some inflection points. That's a funny little coincidence. Okay, Well, moving along a little bit, a quote you said that I really liked. It was clear that psychedelics would be affected most likely in negative ways by the rapid deployment of capital in this space. Marik, I love this take, and I'm curious. Let's play this out both ways. What is at stake as you see the psychedelic renaissance? So let's say it gets tainted by the money and black hat characters. What does that look like? Let's say the opposite happens. It blossoms and we have a full-on psychedelic renaissance that has played out. What does that look like? What do those two extremes look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I think both are inevitably going to happen, and just happen in like different spaces at different scales. But I think like on the, on kind of the, like starting with the dark side of things, capitalism is going to push this as far as it can push it. It already is. And what we're going to see is a lot of these therapeutics, a lot of these medicines not becoming accessible. We're going to see, and we already are seeing, many of the for-profits trying to stifle and suppress decriminalization efforts, and the ability for people to just have access to these therapies and medicines. But we're also going to see just like, commodification to a crazy level. Like we just submitted a manuscript, my co-author and I, Maya Albert, called Our Trip Together. And looking to publish that in spring of 2022 with New Degree Press. And one of the things that we write about in there, and it's an example I give kind of as capitalism gone too far, is the Coke bottle in a retreat center. So, we know that people are able to experience significant neuroplasticity, significant changes in consciousness, et cetera, with these types of compounds, with these types of therapies, and significant impressionability in regards to what is their surrounding set and setting. If you're able to say that people, are 80% more receptive to, advertising when they're watching a television screen in this type of setting, you're also able to say that, hey, they're this percent more receptive when they're under the influence of a psychedelic. And at some point, there are going to be, types of partnerships that are in conversations where, Coca-Cola, for instance, comes in and says, hey, we know that your patient population is this much more receptive to, an advertisement or a Coke bottle that they're able to drink from during their session, or maybe in the 5 minutes after their session as they're walking away and going back home. Can we partner with you? We'll sponsor your center if you put, Coke products into this place, and, have people more excited about Coca-Cola products when they leave. So, and I don't think that it can be that extreme, and it can be like Coca-Cola doing this, but there's a lot of other, examples. Like, it might not be Coca-Cola, it might be another brand, but sponsorship is going to happen. Other things that are going to happen is like pushes towards recurring revenue. So like microdosing, even though we don't have research to show that it's truly compelling yet, already, like that's what the for-profit space is really looking at right now and hoping for, because it's recurring revenue. You're constantly taking it. And at that point, it's just becoming, functional, much like an SSRI, trying to, possibly help you resolve certain things, but really doing so on a recurring basis. You're constantly taking that. There's not necessarily a path forward. And that's actually how many SSRIs started out. Is the intention was never to, in the medical field, was never to keep people on SSRIs for life. That was not part of the plan. The plan was you give people SSRIs so that they can lower the threshold to be able to counteract the trauma, the difficult situations that they're facing in their lives, overcome that with a higher level of oxytocin, dopamine, whatever positive chemicals that they have, and an easier ability to engage with those actual deep rooted issues. But because of the marketing that's allowed within the US in regards to pharmaceuticals, because of how doctors are influenced through big pharma, now there is this culture of like, not only, it's acceptable to take SSRIs for life. It's actually something that a lot of people have embodied as like they are dysfunctional unless they take SSRIs or comparable medications for the rest of their lives. And that's not how it started. That was not the intention. But now the culture has changed. And with psychedelics, it's very likely that we're going to see many of the same dynamics. And there's going to be a villainization of people who resist that, just like there's been a villainization of people who resist the idea that SSRIs should be taken for life. It's like, oh, well, you don't understand depression. You don't understand what I'm struggling with, et cetera. There's going to be a villainization of people who are like, listen, microdosing maybe isn't the best therapy with psychedelics that you can be taking. It's more high dose, and weaning yourself off of this using possibly a microdosing regimen to work through some issues,
yes,
but ultimately walking away from these substances after those issues are resolved and integrating afterwards. So that, I guess, is like a summary of kind of some of the dark pieces that I think will unfold, and we're going to have to work through, some like very dark, some less so. And I could go on all day about, I guess, like all of the ethical concerns of rolling out consciousness changing compounds. But on the light side and on the blossoming side, I think that what we're going to see and what we are seeing is, stronger community dynamics in certain respects, a lot of like real hope and support for different types of movements and efforts. For instance, right now we're having conversations with Howard University, which is an HBCU, to launch the first psychedelic research institute at an HBCU to basically plug up a lot of the holes in the research around like racial equity, around racial inequity in terms of patient populations, and in terms of the researchers who are actually conducting this research, more focus on things like racial trauma, et cetera. And there's been just tremendous support for a movement like that, and tremendous support for doing things that are not necessarily just like psychedelic research, but are going a step beyond that and really thinking about psychedelics as also a social justice movement. So there's a lot of like, really positive community dynamics in certain ways, which has been great to see. There's a greater openness. There's more people trying psychedelics, which is good in certain ways. But there's also, with the rapidness, again, it kind of goes back to the dark side, is like we're moving very quickly. There's a lack of education. There's more people stepping into this. There's multiple people having bipolar and schizophrenic breaks. Some people who are, new to working in the industry, but have started and, weren't really informed that if they have that, background of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, they shouldn't be interacting with these substances. So that's a whole thing that's happening right now that very few people are talking about. So there's a lot of problems already happening. Yeah. There's a lot of positives happening. They're both happening at once. And we're just hoping to be able to at least create space for as much of the positive take hold as it can, because the negative is going to do what the negative does. So yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think you're right. It's like, look, some of these companies, they have to have plans. Everyone has a strategy. Nobody thinks they're the bad guy. And, making money isn't evil, but there is one thing that you said, this idea of stifling the decriminalization, that is a bridge too far, in my opinion. So I appreciate that you brought that up. You also said this difference between macrodosing and microdosing. I really appreciate that, because yes, there's value in microdosing. Maybe it's a good weaning tool and or maybe a lead up to a full dose, but I'm a macrodose guy. And I think you've got to get to that deep cleaning to have the real impact. And the microdosing is kind of like the, if you get a sinus infection, you get antibiotics, you got to take 4 that first day, you got to take a pill each day the rest of the week. That's what the microdosing is. It's that kind of follow on, but you still have to do the big dose. And so I appreciate that you brought that up. Speaking of big doses, an especially meaningful experience that I've had on the mystical side with one of my bigger doses was, these are all ineffable, as you know, Marik. And for me, I met God. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it wasn't an Old Testament God. It wasn't even a human form. It was this like amorphous energy form or blob almost. And what I took from it was, I was interacting with this entity, and what I remember was 2 things. One, it was just so much bigger than me on like a dimensional scale that's hard to explain, but it was so much bigger than me. And I felt, in addition, a profound sense of love from it. And
Mhm.
what the best way I can analogize it, it's very difficult to describe, but if you've ever had a really smart dog, at times that dog will just look at you and it just wants to know, it just wants to understand. And you want to communicate that. You want to share, the situation, wish you could talk to it. And instead you can't, there's certain things that he won't understand. So instead you shower him with love. And it felt like I was on the opposite side. I was the dog, where I knew there was things I just couldn't understand. And yet I felt a profound sense of love wash over me. And that experience oftentimes brings me to tears just thinking about it. It was so moving. I'm curious for you, is there a transcendent experience that still sticks with you today?
Yeah. So I've had many kind of like mid-tier dose experiences, but I just haven't had the opportunity, and I'm not very I don't really pursue things that aren't kind of offered in due time. And so I haven't had an experience of like, I would say, 200 micrograms of LSD or above that. So really like ego death types of experiences, I just haven't had the experience of at this point in time. But I've definitely had a lot of very meaningful kind of like mid-tier, like 100 micrograms to 150 micrograms of LSD, closer to like 3 grams, like 3 to 4 grams of mushrooms types of experiences. And for me, a lot of those.
Wait, 3 to 4 grams of mushrooms, you would call that not a full dose?
Well, I will say I have never gone through. The thing is also for me, most of the time that I've taken psychedelics has been in more not large social settings like parties, but with friends where you are actively doing something. So
got it.
You are either painting or singing or playing piano, like writing poetry, something like that. And so it's a lot harder when you're active, I have found, to like get into a space where you like close your eyes and you really let the experience take you. And so I think that at those dosages, if I had just locked myself in a dark room and closed my eyes, I probably would have gotten to, a pretty far place. But typically what I've really enjoyed using psychedelics for is like building community through creative expression and like being able to create things in settings. Like that's what a lot of our retreats were focused on, is like, can you bring a group of people together and have like everyone in a room, some folks singing, some folks painting, some folks writing poetry, some folks playing instruments, and like everyone kind of vibing off of one another in this like really flow type of state, and use that as like a foundation to build community. So for me, that's been like extremely rewarding and fulfilling. And many of my most fulfilling experiences have actually not even, I've definitely had significant realizations, significant, perspective changes with psychedelics. But I would say the most impactful experiences, the ones that like really I call back to or I reference when I describe to other people, have actually all been very focused on like moments where community felt super connected and I was super aligned with other people. So like one of those moments on the first like big retreat that we ran at Yale, there was like a moment in the evening where people were coming down and we had some singing bowls and came up, like started playing like one of the singing bowls, and people started to like soon come up as well. And then we ended up like laying on the ground, like all holding hands and singing for like 3 hours straight. Like it was just like insane, and like moments like that, just anything that's really focused on like, community being together, like harmonizing off of one another, whether that's through actual literal music or in other ways and frequencies, like that to me has been some of the most fulfilling work that I think I've been able to do within this space, and what I still look for. I think I'm also pretty sensitive to like hallucinations with cannabis. So a lot of my most like, I think, consciousness changing experiences, I definitely got way more far out with psychedelics in terms of kind of entering other realms and things like that. But when it came to like actual perspective shifts on my own subconscious and how I view the world, I think actually a lot of that came through early experiences with cannabis when I was like in my late teens. That's like where I saw a lot of like, myself processing death, myself processing like interpersonal dynamics with my family, like different traumas that I had had, because again, I was seeing visuals, a lot of visuals with cannabis as well. And would oftentimes there, I actually was a lot of times in solitude, kind of closing my eyes and going in deeper. So when it came to psychedelics, I feel like a lot of the self-work had been, processed in certain ways. I think I can still go way deeper, and there's a lot of things I've still learned, but in terms of the taking a compound and then having a profound shift in consciousness. I don't think it was as much of like a reality shift for me, or like as much of a surprise to me when psychedelics provided some of those things as it was when cannabis provided them for me much earlier on. So yeah, I would say that those are some of the things.
I love that. And the way you just put that, when you went back to some of the sessions you're doing, building community, creativity, and music, getting to a flow state, that is really near and dear to my heart. And I think there's a lot of use cases for mental illness, which is great. And, you know, as a ER doctor triaging, you got to focus there first. And maybe that's the Trojan horse. But for me personally, I think there is a bigger market or opportunity, and a more fascinating one, to use psychedelics with healthy people, high achievers, high performers like Yale MBAs, and to be able to reach the potential of creativity and cognitive performance with psychedelics. And it doesn't have to be that you meet God or that you have this ego death, but the neuroplasticity, what it can do for really smart people, is kind of what you were doing in these guided sessions. And the music, there's something there, that this music activating that part of your brain where it's like the rising tide then kind of raises all boats. So I appreciate that. And that cannabis share, that's phenomenal. And I think that's really useful for people. The mind altering substance doesn't have to be psychedelics. It's just that shift. And sometimes it's like the radio frequency, it's like when it's fuzzy and all of a sudden a slight shift and all of a sudden it's clear as day. And you might've had that with cannabis. Okay, Marik, we are done with the deep dive session. Now we're going to transition to what we call the speed round soul search. And the idea, it's kind of like a Tony Kornheiser PTI style quick hitters, 4 questions. And we want to kind of get a window into the soul for you, beyond just the business guy, but you, the man. So 4 questions. And if you can, 10 seconds or less on the response. So brevity is the soul of wit, if you don't mind. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
Okay. So Marik, dead or alive, which famous person would you like to have a psychedelic experience with?
My typical go-to is Kanye West when I'm asked this question. I don't really know, though. I don't think he should be taking psychedelics. I think he's a little predisposed to bipolar or schizophrenia. But yeah, he might be one. And then maybe one of my parents, I think, would be good as well.
Oh, I love that answer. You know, I'm kind of with you on that. He's been villainized, but I'm like, at a certain point, I feel like our generation looks at him like a generation before us looks at MJ, Michael Jackson, where it's like, well, hold on a second. He made Flashing Lights. He made Runaway. You're supposed to tell me I'm villainizing this guy? No. Okay, number 2.
Yeah.
10 years on a desert island, and you get to have just one mind-altering substance. Who you got?
Ooh, are there people on the island?
Just you.
Just me, man. Yeah, probably psilocybin or LSD. Yeah, maybe cannabis. Actually, maybe even cannabis. I think I would probably choose for that. Though I was, fun fact, I know there's more than 10 seconds. I was voted most desirable to be stranded on a desert island with in high school as my superlative. So, you know, clearly a fun guy to be stranded in the middle of nowhere with. So yeah.
That's a good feather in the cap on the high school yearbook. Wait, all right. So what was your final answer? Cannabis?
I think cannabis. Yeah.
I'm not mad at that. Okay. Question number 3. Marik, what are you curious about?
Man, I think the question, like, I'm always curious about very large convictions or strong convictions in like things we take for granted. Like, is peace always the right answer? Like, that's like one, or like, like, how, like, what is there like a positive application of like anger in our interpersonal dynamics? Like, is there, like those types of questions that are very big about like always kindness, always peace. Cause I live my life in many ways like that, but there is still always a question of like, is that truly always the answer? In what situations is conflict, aggression, etc., necessary or useful, or does it have a place in life and society in any way? And do the utopian kind of like ideals that many of us strive for, are they really grounded in any sort of true reality?
So basically, what is it that brings conviction to people in their own beliefs?
Yeah, and even more specifically, like whether those convictions have any real merit when played out in reality. Yeah.
Or are they based on emotion, perhaps? Okay, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Final question. So you walk down the street, you want to wet your beak, you pop into a bar, pull up a chair, and sitting next to you is God. And he says, hey, Marik, you know, a big fan of your work. I got to run. I got a busy day, but I have time for one question. What is the one question that you would ask God?
Man. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Is everything going as planned? I think would be my one question. Yeah.
Okay. Marik, you know, I do this segment with a lot of people. This is one of my favorites so far. Where can listeners find you? Do you have any action items or requests for the listeners and viewers?
I'm trying to be more active on Twitter, but honestly, the best place to follow everything we do is Psyched Studio on Instagram. So Psyched, just at Psyched Studio. Psyched as in like I'm psyched to be here, and then studio. I think that's the best place. We post content on like everything that we're working on, the book, the conference. We're about to start a whole kind of educational Instagram Reels thing. So stay updated with our stuff on there. And feel free to reach out at Marik at Tabula Rasa Ventures. Always happy to chat with folks. Excellent. We will put both of those in the description. Marik Hazan, thank you for joining the show. Yes. Thank you so much, Ray. Appreciate it. Okay, well, it's time for our final segment. Producer Kevin, the slap and the clap. Sometimes you got to give out a little bit of critique. Sometimes you got to give out some praise. And for today's slap, perhaps a slap on the wrist or maybe upside the head, bad behavior goes to Mindset Pharma. They claim they've built the perfect microdosing drug. And look, maybe it's the old any press is good press, but it just feels irresponsible. It feels misleading and bad for the industry. Oh, really, Mindset Pharma? You've got some peer-reviewed studies on this proving it's better than psilocybin or LSD? Really? I must have missed that paper. A slap to you, Mindset Pharma. And the clap goes to MindMed. Look, power corrupts, and so can money. And many of the very well-funded companies are either doing tone-deaf, confusing, or downright villainous moves. Yet MindMed feels like one of the good guys. They're focused on data, research, making savvy deals, and much like General Kutuzov in 1812, taking the patient approach and remembering that nushto padiyela yesh. Clap to you, MindMed. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. Thank you to Marik Hazan, producer Kevin. I'm Ray Christian. See you next time.